On today's show, does Jimmy Butler make sense in Cleveland? I've got Spencer Davies with me. We're going to talk about it right here on Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. You can help to grow the show. Listen every day wherever you get your podcasts. You can watch on YouTube. Subscribe to the show as well. Apple, Spotify, everywhere you get your podcasts. We are free there. Free on YouTube as well. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Today's show brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bets. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on. That's FanDuel.com/locked on. I'm Danny Cunningham. You might know me from 92.3 The Fan. You might know me from Cleveland Magazine from my days covering the Cleveland Cavaliers at ESPN Cleveland as well. Joined today by Spencer Davies of Cavs Insider. He's been around a long time covering this basketball team. We have a lot to talk about. Spencer, thanks so much for taking the time. Thrilled to have you on the show today.
Of course, Danny. No problem, my man.
So the number one topic that has sort of been, I don't want to say has overtaken the Cavs discourse right now, but it's been, I think, a pretty big player as far as the Cavs go, and that is Jimmy Butler, which is a situation I didn't expect to be talking about this offseason at all, but how we got here. So I think the most recent thing that's been reported by Keith Pompey of the Philadelphia Inquirer is that, things in South Beach don't look all that great between Miami and Jimmy right now. And he says that the Cavaliers might be a team to keep an eye on there. It's, I think, a really interesting situation to see. But the thing that ultimately I took away from that at the first glance, just, immediately digesting it, is that's a really good sign, Spencer, I think, for the Cavs retaining Donovan Mitchell.
Yeah, I would say so too. And I think it's really important as well to make sure that when we read through the tea leaves and look at some of these articles that come out at this time of the year around the draft and when it comes to the offseason, that we make sure that, these are like reports, right? So like in reading Keith's article, he even said in that paragraph that he was just kind of thinking out loud, right? Like these are not like substantiated, claims that are being made, knowing that something's in the works. It's just kind of a gut feeling. And I think that's what a lot of us do, especially this time of year, just kind of go with what you're hearing and whatnot. But I think in this case, in the Jimmy Butler stuff, that would kind of indicate to me, like you said, that the Cavs would be more inclined to go with a team that's in win now mode instead of continuing to kind of continue to rebuild and continue to develop their guys. I think that's more of a sign that you're inching more towards that other tier, which it's obvious that in the last few years, that's the direction they're going. And with Donovan Mitchell being the guy that's there and seems to want to commit and seems to want to sign this extension and be there for a long time, it feels like that's the way that he would want the organization to go too. And, obviously not too many assets that are in their possession, but they have Darius Garland, they have Jarrett Allen, and there's ways to make it work.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about the potential fit of Butler in Cleveland in a second too, but I think it's pretty telling now, Spencer, that we're starting to hear these types of rumors about, and listening to some other podcasts out there are people trying to create trades to get McCall Bridges into Cleveland, and sign me up for that. I think that would be a perfect fit. But I think because we're starting to hear a lot of that noise, particularly nationally, I think for me, that tells me that things are in pretty good shape with Donovan Mitchell staying in Cleveland. Because for so long, we've been hearing about, where's Donovan going to end up? He's not going to sign the extension. He's going to want to be traded this offseason. And now we're starting to hear about guys that could get traded to Cleveland as opposed to Donovan Mitchell being sent out. And I think for this offseason, that's a really good sign, as it's June 11th right now, but that's a really good sign for the Cavs before a lot of pieces and parts start moving across the league, I think.
Yeah, and it's a little bit, that this few weeks in between until we get to July is probably going to feel like months for Cavs fans just
Right.
wanting to get answers. But yeah, no, I would have to agree with that. And it's, look, there's a core four that's been in Cleveland the last couple of years, and 3 of those guys have been around for the last 4 years. So like, it's kind of probably hard for them to evaluate and know what works and what doesn't work, especially with all the injuries and whatnot. So that probably doesn't put Kobe Altman and Mike Gansey and crew in the best position to evaluate, just because, the sample size probably still isn't big enough, but they're at a point where they need to make a decision and figure out, okay, what's going to maximize Donovan Mitchell's time in Cleveland? What's going to get them closer to that contention where, the Knicks are and where the Celtics are, and when a healthy Philadelphia is. And, you can throw even Miami in there, Milwaukee, that we're not even talking about because they had injury issues themselves. So
Right.
it's a crowded Eastern Conference, and they're probably, kind of pressured to move this thing forward. And incremental wasn't enough to get it done, as we saw with JB Bickerstaff's firing.
Yeah, absolutely. So now let's put on our hypothetical hats here. Let's say, and I know that these are just rumors right now. There's a long way to go, but let's put on our hypothetical hats here and say that there is some real substance to this type of thought process where, Jimmy Butler, and I think there probably is something to his days in Miami just being numbered, like the way that Pat Riley made some comments about Jimmy during the playoffs. I could see there being a breakup in the future there between those two sides. So let's talk hypotheticals here. How do we think Jimmy would fit in Cleveland if that were to be the case? Because if Donovan does stay, I do think it would make sense to break up that core four a little bit, see what you can get for either Darius Garland, Jarrett Allen, or some combination of the two. Maybe Jimmy Butler's an answer there. But from a basketball perspective, what sort of fit do you think he'd be on the Cavs alongside, let's just say here, Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley, and a bunch of other pieces and parts?
Okay, so if Donovan and Evan were there, so I think that Jimmy would probably try to do the same stuff he did with Bam with Evan. Evan would be more in that playmaking type of role, a lot of the dribble handoffs, a lot of the looking over the top, being in the dunker spot, stuff that, you thought you would see this season with Max Strus and him, but there really wasn't too much creativity from that point of view on the offensive end. As far as his fit with Donovan Mitchell, I don't know if I like that, because both of them are pretty ball dominant guys, very aggressive, like to get downhill. Jimmy Butler has more of that kind of mid-range profile than Donovan does. Donovan seems to stick to his pull-up threes and getting to the rack. He obviously has the mid-range in his game, but I think that that's kind of redundant, those two together. Now, you're talking about hypotheticals with that, but what if the hypothetical is that, Donovan Mitchell goes to Miami and Jimmy Butler comes back and stays with, Darius Garland and Evan Mobley? Like, what if that happens, right? Then that seems like more of a natural fit, I think. But is that the return that the Cavs would look for Donovan Mitchell, somebody who just had an amazing playoff run until he got hurt and had an excellent season building upon his first year with the Cavs? I think that's a really tough sell.
Right. And I think if the Cavs are in a position where they have to trade Donovan Mitchell, I don't think they're looking for someone in his mid-30s to be the crown jewel of the return price.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep.
I don't think that's something that
fit.
makes sense.
It has to fit age-wise with this core.
I will say I'd be really curious in looking at how Jimmy would approach a situation where, in Cleveland, he wouldn't be the best offensive player. Like right now, I think it's fair to say Donovan Mitchell is a more talented offensive guy. If you want to maybe say that Jimmy is still the better overall player, certainly with his playoff track record, I get it. I can listen to that. But from just a pure scoring offensive talent, I think Donovan is clearly better than Jimmy at this point in his career. So I do wonder how that would help Jimmy if that were to be the case, because you could talk about someone that, he very clearly has not valued the regular season. I think that is putting it incredibly lightly over the last couple of years. You talk about the Heat being in the play-in the last couple of years and just not, since they were the one seed a few years back, really not caring about the regular season, putting Jimmy in a position where he can coast, still be on a team that potentially is a home court advantage team rather than being a play-in team, and then start to turn things on for the playoffs. I do wonder what that looks like.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. So from going back to the fit too, with those two, you see a lot of the older stars starting to kind of take a backseat to some of the guys that are in the more, more in their prime. You can even look at, it's not really comparable as far as like skill sets go, but you can even look at like the usage, you could say, between Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. Like maybe you look into something like that ilk, because again, two ball dominant guys, probably hard to fit together, especially when they're doing a lot of the same things. But I will say this, Donovan Mitchell did show his chops as a playmaker when Darius Garland went down, and it was huge in the pick and rolls with Jared Allen. So he's proven to be able to be that kind of point guard. But so is Jimmy Butler, though. Jimmy Butler's been a great playmaker too, when called upon in the postseason. So, I mean, it's obviously able to happen, but is that the most, is that the best fit? Is that the best role for either of them when you know what kind of success comes when they both have the ball in their hands?
Yeah, and there are other guys that, it certainly sounds like you think might be a better fit. There are other guys that I think could be a better fit as well when you talk about what a dream target could be for the Cavs. So that's what we're going to dive into next right here on Locked On Cavs. Today's show, of course, is brought to you by FanDuel. Summertime is here. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, and so much more, and you can bet on all of it with FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200. It's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet on everything from Finals MVP. I have a Finals MVP bet that I certainly like right now. Through 2 games, I went into this series thinking, okay, if Dallas wins the series, Luka is going to be the Finals MVP. Or if Boston wins the series, it's probably going to be Jason Tatum, despite the fact we just watched him in the Eastern Conference Finals see the MVP go to Jaylen Brown. But right now, I'm interested in putting a little bit on Drew Holiday to win Finals MVP. You can get him at plus 600 to take home that award. He's been, I think, one of the most important players for Boston in this series. And right now, I think you could make a case that through 2 games, he's that guy. Now, there's still a long way to go in this series. I don't think this is a series where it's going to be a sweep, but just makes you think maybe Drew Holiday is a good fit if you're looking for a little bit of a long shot Finals MVP bet at plus 600. So like I said, you can get $200 that you can use to bet on everything from finals to baseball, hockey, and everything in between. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon, LOCKEDON, and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So, Spencer, we just spent a lot of time talking about Jimmy Butler and how he could potentially fit in with the Cavs. But in listening to what you had to say, it doesn't sound to me like you think he is the best fit or not your dream target. So if you could put on your Kobe Altman hat and you can pretend to be the guy that's pulling the levers for the Cavs, as we go into this exercise, Donovan Mitchell signs a contract extension the day he's allowed to sign it. So that is, as we start thinking about dream targets, Donovan Mitchell is going to be a member of the Cavs. That is solidified. Who is your dream target for this team if that's the case?
Dream targets for me, I have a bunch of them in mind.
Oh, hell yeah.
I don't know if you want to say dream targets and you have like realistic targets. Let's start with dream targets. You mentioned one of them earlier was Mikal Bridges. Mikal Bridges for sure. That's obviously a tough one to figure out what kind of deal would really work out for that. Just, I don't know if Darius Garland or Jared Allen would be enough. They've apparently demanded a king's ransom for him on the market already. I always think of, Trey Murphy down in New Orleans, just a bomber from deep and is just somebody who has the right size and length on defense. Similar player in San Antonio, Devin Vassell, but reports are saying that he's untouchable as well. So I would say probably those 3 come to mind right off the top of my head. If you want somewhat realistic, less trade machine-y stuff, I've always thought to myself, the last year or so, what would it be like for Donovan Mitchell to have a bigger guard next to him and somebody that doesn't require the ball? And I know he has injury history, but I also know that this team isn't really in the best of places, so maybe they would be in an acquisition of talent mode. I think to Portland. I think to Malcolm Brogdon and Jeremy Grant. Try to get both of them because Jeremy Grant's kind of got that length, obviously can play that tertiary role, very, very capable defensively. And with Malcolm Brogdon, if he stays healthy, I think he's one of the best table setters in the game. And he's 6'4", 6'5". Put him next to Donovan Mitchell. I think that is your ideal fit. I don't know the realism of that, but I think that's a little bit more towards something you can actually talk about versus something you can plug into the internet and say, oh, let's make this deal work right away. So those are just ones that, that I've thought of. But it's not easy to find these wings out here, and it's not easy to find guards who aren't ball dominant. It's just the nature of the league.
Yeah, it's tough to find the perfect fit. I do think McCall Bridges is that perfect fit, though, man. Like, everything that the Cavs are looking for in a wing, it feels like McCall Bridges can do. And we talk about the Cavs as being one of the most interesting teams this offseason, and I think that they are, just because, they have a coaching vacancy still, the Donovan Mitchell question. But the direction the Brooklyn Nets want to go, I think could be a pretty big pivot point across the NBA, because if McCall Bridges is made available, there are going to be a lot of teams that are interested in him. Like, I do wonder, would a Darius Garland for McCall Bridges trade be something the Nets are interested in? I don't know. Like, he would probably be the guy that, I don't know if I have him number one, so to say, but he's the guy that I would be most interested in as that dream target. I'm glad you brought up the Portland thing, though, because while Jeremy Grant doesn't move the needle a ton for me, like, I think he's a fine player. I think he'd be a solid fit. I just think that there are other options that could be better for the Cavs. Bringing over Malcolm Brogdon, even with the injury history that he's got in his time in the NBA, I do think could be a really good way to balance the backcourt. Because I wonder if Darius Garland is not here next year, I think that would mean Donovan Mitchell's going to be playing more point guard. But I also don't think that Donovan Mitchell can only be a point guard. Like, I think that's a bad idea. And having someone like Brogdon could really help to make that role so much easier for him.
Yeah, you got to share possessions, and it's not easy to kind of put 40% usage on someone's back and expect them to do it an entire season. It's hard enough even in a playoff run. You saw how much fatigue that Donovan had even coming into this. He had the issue with his knee coming in, and that was pretty much after putting the team on his back for such a long time. And you get to the postseason, something flares up again, and all of a sudden you're out of luck. So that's, I think, a really important thing, is have someone that can take some possessions off a guy who's also capable of scoring and shooting themselves. And as we talk about targets and dream card targets and whatnot like that, I get a couple other ones that come to mind, maybe a little less quote unquote sexy, but you look to Brooklyn. I think Dorian Finney-Smith has been kind of miscast in his role over there. 6'9", He's got plenty of length, makes his money as a corner shooter and somebody who can really defend. I think he would be a beautiful fit in Cleveland. And secondly, the one that kind of sprung up in reports the last couple of days, Atlanta said they're looking for a place maybe for DeAndre Hunter and Clint Capella to go. I think DeAndre Hunter might be one of the most underrated 3-and-D wings in the league. He also has injury history similar to Brogdon, but somebody who's obviously got an improved shot from deep, somebody who can put it on the floor when necessary, not primarily, but when necessary. And we obviously know his defensive chops. So, we just keep throwing names out there, and this is how the game goes at this time of the off season. But, I think that those two obviously, could make some sense as well.
So the one other name, and I'm glad you brought up Dorian Finney-Smith. I think he would be a really good fit. I like DeAndre Hunter a lot. I liked him coming out of college. Obviously, he was the 4th overall pick, what feels like forever ago, by Atlanta. But the guy that we haven't mentioned yet that I think pops up kind of every time this discussion is had is Brandon Ingram. What would you think about his fit on the Cavs?
Not a fan.
How come?
I do think that he's extremely talented. I do. I think Brandon Ingram, again, one of those guys who's really aggressive and has that shot profile similar, to a Jimmy Butler. He's very, mid-range oriented. Somebody who does get to the rack. He doesn't have quite as much muscle, but he does have length. Something that this kind of just doesn't sit right with me with Brandon Ingram, though, and maybe it's because of the way that things have shaken out in New Orleans, but it just seems like he plays sleepy sometimes. And, you don't want someone who isn't going to be giving it 100% every single time, and I hate saying that because I hate disparaging any types of players, but when you watch, there's games where he looks like he could be a top 10 player in the NBA. And then there's other games where you're like, Why isn't he being aggressive? Why is he, settling for these shots? And again, it could be fit, and maybe it is unfair to say it, but just watching these games, sometimes it just seems like he's a little bit he's playing slow.
Sure. I think that makes sense. I do think that there are times wherein I hate to do this, but it almost feels like there's a little bit of Andrew Wiggins in his games where he can float at times. Like I do think that that is a thing. I wonder if that's a bet that the Cavs are willing to make, that that's a fit-based issue and not a Brandon Ingram-based issue, because I think that's something that's very possible. I think it's clear he's not being maximized in New Orleans, and I just wonder, playing alongside a really good guard as opposed to just a good guard that he's got in CJ McCollum right now in New Orleans, maybe that boosts his profile. Maybe that helps him out just a little bit. Last thing we've got on today's show, there was coaching news yesterday in the NBA world. How does that affect the Cavs? That's next right here on Locked On Cavs. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. If you are thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule. A lot of people right now, you're able to work from home, but maybe that means it's difficult for you to go into the office and take care of your mental health. BetterHelp can help you to do that because they are so fit for your schedule. They're suitable for any needs that you have. Just go online, fill out a brief questionnaire, and you can get matched with a licensed therapist. Plus, you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. I think that's a really big deal because finding the therapist that fits your needs isn't always the easiest thing. So until you find the therapist you need, being able to switch one without it incurring an additional charge, that's a really important thing. And I think that's a really good thing that BetterHelp does. So if you need to, get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA, and you can get 10% off your first month. So, Spencer, we found out yesterday that Dan Hurley, head coach of the UConn Huskies, turned down the Los Angeles Lakers. Not going to go coach LeBron, who is a free agent after all. Like, that's something that I don't think is getting talked about enough, and maybe that starts to get talked about more with how that coaching search has gone. Anthony Davis, in just a glamour franchise of the NBA, turns down that deal, opts to stay at Connecticut. I think that this has a little bit of an impact as the Cavs are searching for their coach, because now, JJ Redick was a hot name in Los Angeles. We haven't really heard him all that connected with the Cavs opening. But James Borrego was the other hot name for the Lakers, and that is one that we have heard here in Cleveland. So the thing that I'm taking away is maybe this actually speeds up the Cavs process here if Borrego is the guy that they are super interested in being the next head coach of this organization.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good assumption. James Borrego, somebody who is originally reported to be on their top two. It was him and Kenny Atkinson. If you really want to break down what Borrego is capable of, I mean, you just look at the last year that he had in Charlotte. He had a top five offense with a team that played really fast and had a rookie LaMelo Ball. Miles Bridges was just, kind of start getting to his, rise to stardom. Terry Rozier was having one of the best years of his career, and they canned him because apparently they weren't playing enough defense. But you could look at that as a scapegoat situation. But that makes a lot of sense, though, especially if LA is interested in bringing in a JJ Redick, then the Cavs probably should move a little bit quicker, because the reports that I had read, at least, were that Redick would have a quote-unquote all-star assistant staff, right? Like, that would bring in probably guys who have had head coaching experience and had a lot of years in the league, and Borrego would probably be on that list to help him as an associate. So that makes a lot of sense what you're pondering there. And we'll see how these interviews go over the next coming weeks, depending on how quick the Cavs get things done. Kobe told us on his end of season press conference that they'd like to have someone in by the time the draft rolls around, but it just seems like it's probably going to pick up, I would assume. But they're taking their time. They're trying to find the right guy, right person.
Well, I mean, it certainly feels like they're taking their time, and then you look at the Lakers opening, which has been open much longer than the Cavs one, so they are really taking their time. With the Borrego stuff, like I mean, maybe he's on LA's on a potential JJ Redick staff, but I also don't think it's a situation where he's going to pass up being the potential head coach of the Cavs if he were to be offered an assistant job. And I think part of that's because, one, there's only 30 of these jobs in the world, right? But the other thing, I think the Cavs opening, Spencer, is such a better opening than the Lakers one. I just don't see a ton of positives to being the head coach of the Lakers right now, other than it's one of 30 jobs and it's the Lakers. It's a glamour franchise. But when you start to stack it up, it's the Western Conference, much more difficult right now to get through than the East, despite the East having the best team in basketball. It's really difficult to coach an aging superstar, which LeBron James is. I think the Cavs are just so much better set up for success over the next 3 to 5 years. I think if you have your pick, even between the two head jobs, the Cavs should be your choice.
I think so too, just from the sense of, yes, there's expectations here, but Los Angeles expectations with a team with LeBron James and Anthony Davis are probably just
through the roof. They're unrealistic.
Yeah.
Like Darvin Ham made the Western Conference Finals, and I get it. This is not all a results thing, but he made the Western Conference Finals in his first year, and then in year 2 gets fired after losing in 5 games to the defending champs. Like, it's a raw deal, and I get it's not all the results, but I just think Cleveland is such a better situation for whether it's Borrego, Atkinson, even if the Cavs were to be more interested in JJ Redick. Like, if I'm one of those coaches, I cannot imagine picking the Lakers job over the Cavs, just if you want to be set up for success.
Yeah, and if you look at it from this perspective too, knowing all that stuff happened with Dan Hurley, how much money they offered him, the amount of years, you already know that you're going to be their second choice or their third choice. Even if you look at earlier in the, after the season, they were talking about Tyronn Lue possibly going over there from the other LA team and potentially being the head coach. So that you're not their first option. So that I don't know. Exactly. So I don't see. You do have the opportunity to coach one of the best players in the world and another one of the best players in the world in Anthony Davis. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
But if you look at from a long-term perspective, how the Cavs organization has treated its coaches, I think that the longevity might be a little bit more attractive too. If you look at, JB Bickerstaff had almost 5 years here. We can skip over the John Beilein stuff. Tyronn Lue was here for a good 4.5 years.
And we can skip over the David Blatt stuff.
Exactly. So you look at the shelf life on a Lakers head coach as of late too. And I mean, that's an NBA overall thing. Like, they're not getting much leeway anymore. It's a players league, understanding that, but still, even if you're like looking it over and you're looking at the amount of younger talent, the Cavs have, and this again depends on what happens in the trade market on draft night. Are Darius Garland and Evan Mobley and Jared Allen and Donovan Mitchell all going to be together? Is there going to be 3 of them? Is there going to be 2 of them? That's also very important. But I think that part probably plays a little bit more of in favor of them than someplace in LA with LeBron and Anthony Davis, and seeing the kind of fan reactions is over there and seeing the kind of pressure that you're constantly under. It just seems like being out of the spotlight might help. Yeah,
I absolutely just think it's a much better situation. But Spencer, very much appreciate you taking the time and joining the show today.
Of course, Danny. Appreciate you.
You can find Spencer at Cavs Insider. You can find him on Twitter at Spin Davies, all the great stuff he does. I'm Danny Cunningham again. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Locked on Cavs. Thank you for making us your first listen every day. Be sure to like the show on YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel, give us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts, and we will talk to you tomorrow.